an overview of our codes, our units, and also crucially how to buy them. We'll then be joined by Alex Procton, who's from Ecosystems Marketplace, who will talk a bit about the pricing of units, and also Henrietta Stock, Senior Sustainability Manager from Aviva, who will provide insights as a carbon buyer. We'll then open the discussion out to take any questions that you might have. So please do pop them into the chat as you go, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. I'd also like to highlight that we're recording today's session, so you can watch that back via our website afterwards if you'd like. I think that's everything for now, so I'll just hand straight over to Vicky. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan, and welcome everybody to the webinar today. This is just a quick overview of what we're going to talk through. So Renee and I will talk a little bit about our standards, why you might buy UK credits, what the kind of credits are that we offer, and a little bit about how you go about buying them. And then we'll hand over to Alex from Ecosystem Marketplace and Henrietta to talk about the prices and give us a bit of a perspective from a buyer in terms of what it's like to go through the process. So first of all, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code. So the Woodland Carbon Code is managed by Scottish Forestry. It's been going since 2011 and deals with woodland creation in the UK. There's a range of kind of project types within woodland creation. So the majority would be native woodlands and mixed woodland types, and there's a range of kind of species and management. The Woodland Carbon Code is endorsed by an international body called ICROA, and we're also applying to be accredited under ICVCM. That's the latest global kind of watch body for carbon standards. The Peatland Code is managed by IUCN UK Peatland Programme and has been going since 2015. That deals with peatland restoration or re-wetting in the UK. The Peatland Code is applying to both ICROA and ICVCM at the moment as well. So we're trying to make sure that these two standards are both high integrity standards in the UK. Just as a bit of background in terms of the number of projects involved, we've got around 700 projects validated to the Woodland Carbon Code, and they're predicted to generate around 12 million tonnes of CO2, or not generate, they're predicted to save 12 million tonnes of CO2 over the next 100 years. The Peatland Code has around 75 projects that have got to the project validated stage, and they're predicted to reduce around 3 million tonnes of CO2 over their lifetime as well. So that's where we are. In terms of the Peatland Code, there's two different types of kind of peatland restoration allowed. So there's upland bogs and lowland fen methodology within the Peatland Code. So as well as us trying to make sure that the carbon standards are high integrity in terms of the units we generate, there's also a global initiative to make sure that there's a sort of high integrity in the buyer side of this relationship, and that's a voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative. And they set out various stages that it would be great if companies went through to ensure that they're a high integrity buyer of carbon credits, and to kind of enable trust in both sides of the markets. So before companies come to us to look at buying Woodland Carbon Code or Peatland Code credits, it would be great if they went through this kind of process of looking through these steps set out by the VCMI. So the first one is to say, okay, well, let's look at your emissions, measure and report them. Then think about whether or not you set a science-based target. So how are you going to reduce your emissions in a science-based way, and then get your emissions reduction target validated. Ideally, companies would be reducing their emissions as much as possible, and then when they come to buy high integrity credits, they're buying credits for those remaining unavoidable emissions that they can't manage within their science-based target. So Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code projects are there to fight climate change and to enhance ecosystems. So it's way more than just buying a ton of CO2. There's a lot more behind that. And hopefully buying our credits will enhance your brand reputation and demonstrate your commitment to sustainability. So just a little bit more about our credits. So all our credits are high integrity. As I've said, we're both looking to be endorsed by ICVCM, the kind of global watchdog for carbon standards. So all our credits are additional. They're scientifically robust. They're verified by an ISO accredited third party. So in the UK, there's 3 accreditation bodies that we are using at the moment. They are all transparently represented on the UK Land Carbon Registry, so that you can see what projects are, what status there are, what units we've issued, and who owns them at any point. Our projects could be local to your business, so unlike buying credits from an international project, you have the opportunity to get involved. That could be visiting the site. It could be more directly involved in the restoration work on the site. Either your staff or your customers could be involved in the project. Our projects provide wider benefits, so that could be improvements to the water quality or managing the water quantities in site. It could be improvements to biodiversity. It could offer health and well-being for the local population or for visitors, and it could offer local employment opportunities and educational opportunities. Within the Woodland Carbon Code, we use what we call the Woodland Benefits tool. So that gives each of our projects a score in 4 areas. So it gives them a score for the water benefits, the community benefits, the biodiversity benefits, and the economy benefits. Within the Peatland Code, it's now possible for projects to look at how they meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the project design document for a peatland project, you can see which Sustainable Development Goals the project will be working to meet. So that's just a little bit about how our standards work and how the credits that we produce are high integrity. So I'm going to hand over to Renee now, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about exactly what units you can buy and how you go about it.
Thanks, thank you. So I'm going to start with what type of credits we have on the Woodland Carbon Code and on the Peatland Code, and then I'll go into detail on how to actually buy these credits. So first of all, we've got PRUs and PCUs or WCUs. So PRUs are pending issuance units. So they are a promise to deliver in the future. So in a peatland setting, the emission reduction hasn't happened yet, but we expect it to happen in the future. In a woodland, the sequestration hasn't yet happened yet, but it's expected in the future. They are not guaranteed, but it helps to compensate for emissions in the future. There is obviously a risk with PRUs, so they might not be verified. So like I said, they're not guaranteed. So they might not become verified units in the future. And it depends on the legal contract that's set up between the buyer and the seller at a point of sale about who carries that risk going forward. Both Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code set up these PRUs at the start of the project. So it's really to bring in finance if you need it at the start of the project. You can sell some of those, all of those, none of those. It's really up to the landowner if they want to sell PRUs or not. So at the moment on the UK Land Carbon Registry, so that's both the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, we've got more than 5 million PRUs available. Then the other type of credit is the woodland carbon unit or the peatland carbon unit. So those are verified credits. So they are, in a peatland setting, we know the emission reduction has happened at that point. And in the woodlands, like, we know the trees are growing and they have sequestered a certain amount of carbon. And 1 unit represents 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. And in here on the slide, it says less into the atmosphere. And that's really a point around the whole discussion around removals are more important, for example, on SBTi than emission reductions, which is not true, and it shouldn't be true, because actually if you plant a tree or if you restore a peatland, they have the exact same result to the atmosphere. As a direct result of your project, you have less carbon in the atmosphere for both a woodland as well as a peatland project. So just want to really make that clear, that it should not matter, and it should not be a difference between the two, because the atmosphere is what is really important. However, I know that that's not how everyone in the market sees that. But for us, it's the atmosphere, it's what drives climate. So that should be our point of reference here. You can report against your unavoidable UK emissions for those verified credits. At the moment, there are less than 1,000 verified woodland units available on the registry. And for the peatland, we actually don't have any verified units available yet. So we're currently doing the first 2 verifications. And that's because the first verification only happens 5 years after finishing the restoration. So we've not been going for that long. We were launched in 2015, but the first projects actually were registered in 2017, with the restoration slightly later. So hence why we're now in the process of the first 2 verifications. But we do know there will be lots more verified credits coming in the future. Then how can you actually buy these credits? And so we've got an online registry, so the UK Land Carbon Registry, which has all woodland carbon code and peatland code projects available. And it also shows you which projects have carbon units available, either as PIUs or as those verified carbon units. So you can either go directly onto the public view of the registry, or you can go onto either of our websites. And we have a link to the registry, but also both of our Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code websites have a list of project developers. So the easiest way of buying these credits is look at which project you're interested in, contact the project developer or retail aggregator that's associated with that project, then discuss and negotiate a price and a sale, and then open an account on the registry. So that's for end users, that's £400. So companies that want to use these credits, is £400 to open the account. Then you pay for the units that you've agreed to sale for, and transfer the units to your account. If you buy PIUs, at that point you wait, because you cannot make an offset claim on a PIU. So you have to wait for that PIU to be verified to be able to make an offset claim on that unit. If you have bought WCUs or PCUs, then you can retire them from the registry and report them against your emissions. The other option, for if you are, for example, a small company, or if you only are interested in buying a very small volume of units, there is still a possibility to buy credits without opening an account. So that way we can assign credits to a certain company. That means that as soon as those credits are verified, they immediately are retired, and it gives you a lot less flexibility as a buyer, but you don't have the cost of opening an account. If you would like to buy or sell credits, then please do contact us, and we can help you through that process as well. That was all I was going to say on this. So I'm very happy to hand over to the next speaker, which will be Alex.
Thank you, Vicky and Renee. My name is Alex Procton. I'm the manager for data solutions and insights at the Ecosystem Marketplace. We work together with Scottish Forestry and IUCN for the last 2 years, collaborating to understand more about the Woodland Carbon Code, the Peatland Code, and the market dynamics in the UK VCM. So in Ecosystem Marketplace, we're a nonprofit based in the US. We're part of a larger nonprofit called Forest Trends. And our objective is to become a leading global source of information on environmental finance, markets, and payments for ecosystem services. So in terms of carbon markets specifically, we've been collecting and publishing data on the volume and price of carbon credit transactions for the last 20 years. And we're respected in this role because of our neutral position. Our goal is to advance the cause of environmental finance in general. And so we have no stake in any one standard or project type. We're also committed to equitable access to the insights that we share. Something that's very important to us is working with local communities and working with Indigenous peoples around the world to make sure that the benefits of carbon markets and environmental markets reach all of the communities where these projects take place. And we're also trusted for our data confidentiality policy. Specifically, we never share aggregated data sourced from fewer than 3 respondents. And this has ensured that our respondents feel that they can trust us with their data. We publish annual summaries of the global carbon market in our State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report, which is published in the spring and includes information from the preceding year. But we also collected a bit more detailed information on Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code transactions for the last 2 years to try and understand this growing and emerging market. And so, as I said, because of our confidentiality policy, we're able to share certain data from this research and other data. We're still waiting to receive more data from more respondents. But for the Woodland Carbon Code, we have a pretty robust price and volume history going back to 2020. And so you can see in this chart in the green bars, that's the volume, the blue line is the average price of a Woodland Carbon Code credit. 99% of the credits that have been, the transactions have been reported to us have been those pending issuance units. So even though there have been Woodland Carbon units issued, most of the transactions are still taking place with the PIUs. And we saw a decline in transaction volume between 2022 to 2023, but that really is reflective of a broader contraction in VCM activity. And a lot of that we see as related to global macroeconomic trends, less purchasing power with higher interest rates, and not due to sort of a pullback in general from the voluntary carbon market. And we've also seen very steady average price increases. It's almost, surprising to see how they've increased in such a predictable manner year over year, but this is very in line with what we've seen with credits that come from nature-based projects from other credit issuing standards that have high integrity and that have really good validation and verification schemes in place. And then in terms of some of the other data that we've collected that goes more into depth than what we would be able to share on the broader carbon market, because of our collaboration with Scottish Forestry on this, we did break down by the forest type for the project. And while we're not able to share data on every forest type for every year that we've collected price information, we can say that from 2022 to 2023, both broadleafed and mixed mainly conifer projects had the average price increase year over year. Now the peatland code, because there's been a lot fewer transactions, there have been a lot less data that's been reported to us, but we are able now to share for 2022 that the average price in the peatland code was £23.95. This is very close to the average price of a woodland carbon unit or a woodland carbon code unit, one of those PIUs that were sold. Those are going on average for £23.30 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. But in terms of the transaction volume, it's less than 1/10 of what we're seeing in the woodland code. And so we strongly encourage all carbon market participants who are transacting these peatland code credits, whether you're a project developer or whether you're a retail aggregator or a speculator, please reach out to us at Ecosystem Marketplace. We're currently collecting data for the 2025 State of the Voluntary Carbon Market Report, which, as I said, will be published early next year, and that will include data on global carbon credit transactions for 2024. And if you become a respondent, you get access to exclusive pages on our Global Carbon Markets Hub, which is also available to the public with much of the data that we have released in the State of the Voluntary Carbon Market Report. And of course, all of the data that we've done specifically with this collaboration with Scottish Forestry and with IUCN has been published by the Woodland Carbon Code on their website. So I believe there might be more links to that at the end, but yeah, overall, we're really keen to continue to understand this really unique carbon market and how it's going to grow in the years to come.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think it's me next. So hi everyone, I'm Henrietta. I work for Aviva, who are one of the UK's largest insurance, wealth and retirement businesses. And I'm just going to give my perspective as somebody who's representing an organisation that buys carbon credits and talk a bit about our approach to date. So back in 2021, Aviva set out its ambition to be a net zero company by 2040. And we have a number of interim targets as well, specifically related to things like reducing the carbon intensity of the investments that we make. We have a net zero target for our operational emissions for 2030, so earlier than our kind of overall net zero ambition. And we have had validated our targets through the Science Based Target Initiative. Obviously, we are very focused on reducing emissions, as I think Vicky talked about earlier. Actually, most of our effort is focused on reduction of emissions, but we recognise that we're not going to be at zero emissions for our 2030 and 2040 ambitions. And so actually looking at carbon removals is an important strand of our overall net zero ambition. And when we looked at this back in 2021, we had a bit of a concern, I guess, that when we look at target dates like 2030 and 2040, actually, there may not be enough of these good quality carbon credits available in the market for both ourselves and all the other kind of businesses who are looking to set net zero targets for similar sorts of dates. And when I talk about sort of good quality carbon credits, I mean, I will go into a little bit more detail, but we're talking about, you know, those with the biodiversity benefit, with social and community benefit, and so on. So we decided at that time to set aside £100 million to put towards nature-based carbon removal projects, but particularly looking at trying to support projects that would help move the market forwards to make these projects more commercially investable in the future. So we've got kind of an eye on the future, thinking that, you know, if we can make projects more investable, then they will happen at greater scale and happen more rapidly. So the projects we're supporting are often trying to overcome barriers to making them more investable in the future. So with this funding, we went out to look for projects that deliver kind of what we talk about as being good quality nature-based carbon removal projects. And these are just kind of some of the priorities that we set out in terms of what we're looking for from projects generating carbon removal credits. So we do want to focus on new planting and restoration projects rather than managing existing ones. We do need projects to demonstrate biodiversity benefits with net gain as a minimum and aligned to our own biodiversity policy that we have. We do want projects to demonstrate that community benefit and access for all, to be able to access nature. And as part of that, we also set that we want to support projects within our core markets, which is the UK, Ireland and Canada. And that is so that our customers and our employees can benefit from some of those projects as well. And I think that was mentioned earlier around the opportunity we've then got to engage our employees and sometimes customers in volunteering on the sites and just being able to benefit from connecting with nature as well. We do want a mix of different projects, a geographical mix across those markets, but also actually a habitat mix as well. And that's partly around risk management, and that's also around being able to break down more barriers to making these different projects investable. Robust certification of that carbon sequestration, that's a really essential priority for us. Being able to prove that additionality element of it, knowing that our money has funded something, that the actual removal to happen. And we also need to know that the projects are going to be self-sustaining for the long term. So beyond the period where we might be funding activity that's happening on the ground to generate the sequestration, but knowing that actually because the sequestration and the biodiversity benefits take decades to, really see the full benefit, we need to know that those projects are still going to be as intended for the long term. And we look for projects working to market and international standards in terms of the measurement and the monitoring of the different benefits. So in terms of what we've done so far with that funding, we've funded a number of different projects, which I've just kind of summarised here. As I say, they're all in our core markets of UK, Ireland and Canada. We're trying to target real landscape scale projects and a range of different habitats and have those social and community benefits as well. So we have one project in Ireland with the Nature Trust, which is around new native woodland creation. We have a project with the Woodland Trust in the UK, again, landscape scale, kind of new native woodland. There's a lot of work that the Woodland Trust are doing around research to also try and quantify some of the other benefits of these projects beyond just the carbon sequestration and biodiversity. So particularly looking at things like flood resilience and reducing flood risk from landscape scale, tree planting and peatland restoration. Because if we can quantify that, then there's another reason for kind of financial investment in it. So it's really trying to make sure that we've got the evidence to support that future investability of the projects as well. We have a project with the Wildlife Trust looking at temperate rainforest restoration across the UK and Isle of Man. And this is one where the Isle of Man unfortunately doesn't come under the Woodland Carbon Code, but we're on that project, the team are very much trying to adopt the kind of methodologies of the Woodland Carbon Code, albeit the Isle of Man can't use the actual code formally. That's a slight challenge we have with that, but something that we're looking at going forwards. We have a project in Scotland with Climate Impact Partners, also on woodland creation, and we have a project with the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, which is slightly different, looking at salt marsh creation in the UK. And that's one where the project should support a very similar code to be developed around the Salt Marsh Carbon Code, which some people may be aware of. It's in the process of being developed and consulted on. And we hope that will become a code much like the Woodland and Peatland Carbon Codes, kind of a way of, knowing that you've kind of robustly measured and monitored those sites and can count on that carbon sequestration. And then we have a couple of projects in Canada as well. One around afforestation in Alberta, and one with the Nature Conservancy, which is a mixture of different habitats again, so salt marsh, grassland and afforestation across different parts of Canada. So that's kind of where we've got to with our work on nature-based carbon removals. And I think I'm going to hand back to Vicky now.
Thanks, Henrietta. I'm actually going to hand straight over to Susan, who's going to take us through the questions, as we've seen a few in the chat. But if you do have any more, please pop them in the chat whilst we're talking, and we'll get around to them when we get to that far down the list.
Great, thanks, Vicky. Okay, so we'll kick off with a question from Chris. I think, Renee, you've already answered it slightly, but just to come to you again. How many hectares of degraded peatlands, not including forests on bogs, are there in the UK, and how many are there outside of the UK?
Yeah, I can only answer the first part. I don't know outside of the UK. It's probably a lot, unfortunately. So within the UK, we've just published earlier this year a progress report on the UK peatland strategy, in which we have tried to quantify how much restoration has been done to date in the UK. It's quite shocking. We don't actually know really well, that was quite an eye-opener that nobody's really know the answer. But there's an estimated about 80% of our peatlands are still in a degraded state. They are emitting vast amounts of carbon, more than we pump in the atmosphere through aviation in the UK. So that's how big of an issue this is, and why we need to restore that as soon as we can. And it's about, we've estimated it about 1.7 million hectares. So it's a massive job that we still need to do. And hence why we need private finance to help us, because public funding is not going to be enough for that. Outside of the UK, I really cannot answer that, sorry.
Thank you. Vicky, we've got a question directed to you from Richard. How are the wider Woodland Carbon Code benefits you mentioned measured and verified?
So within the Woodland Benefits tool, that's actually a tool to look at the landowner's intention rather than the actual outcome. So that gives them a score based on the way the woodland is structured and the work they plan to do that will benefit in those 4 areas: the water, community, biodiversity, and economy. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing that is developing at the moment that's not part of either of our standards yet, but is being worked on, is there's 2 projects that are funded by FERNS, which is the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland. So it's Scottish Government Nature Scot funding. And those 2 projects, one is looking at how we measure biodiversity for Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code projects. We're actually going to be consulting on that in January. So if you want to have a look at how that's going, keep your eyes open. The consultation stuff will be out soon. There's another FERNS project which is looking at community benefits of nature market projects, with the idea that we might be able to integrate some of the requirements into either the Woodland Carbon Code or the Peatland Code. So again, those 2 projects are due to finish by March, and we'll kind of propose methodologies, and then we need to work out whether and how we can incorporate those into both the Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code, so we can actually measure the benefits going forwards. And then there's a 3rd project which is funded through DEFRA with Forest Research, that is looking at how you measure the water benefits of woodland projects, with the potential for creating water-based credits. And so again, that project is funded till March, and we're hoping it's going to continue. And that again could potentially feed into the Woodland Carbon Code, at least to have a way of quantifying the water benefits of our projects. So at the moment we don't have a consistent methodology to quantify the actual outcome, but it's being worked on through these other projects, and we hope to think about how we can incorporate those aspects as we move forwards next year. Renee, I don't know if you had anything else to add on the Peatland Code side of things. I think that's all the projects that are ongoing.
Yeah, no, we are, like you said, it's we're following the same, and hopefully the biodiversity and community benefits will give us ways of quantifying and verifying indeed those benefits as well.
Great, thank you. A lot of work going on there. A quick question from Nicola, just wanting to clarify one of the slides, asking whether the 5 million peatland and woodland PIUs, sorry, but the 5 million, was that the peatland and woodland carbon units combined? I think it was.
It is, yes. And if I kind of take that one and slightly answer the next one, I put a link in the chat, but if I just if I share quickly this slide, rather than our presentation, then this is just to show you that the blue here is the PIUs that are already sold and when they're predicted to be delivered. So you can see this is the proportion of our credits that are sold. These green ones are the ones that are available, and when they might be delivered over time. So you can see that there's not very many WCUs are going to appear in the next couple of years, but once you get to 2045, 2050, then you know, the number per year that are going to become available is much more. So the black line shows you the number per year on this scale. So by the time we get here, there's, you know, nearly 300,000 per year that will become available. But we're not quite there yet. So there will be more in future. And if you watch this space, watch this page, we'll update this as more projects are validated and we know how many units will be available.
Thanks, Vicky. I've got a question here about the impact of changes in the US and what they might have in the global voluntary carbon market. Alex, is that something you would like to tackle, or does anyone else have an opinion on that one?
Sure, I can tackle it in general. And I guess I'm seeing the question now, how resilient are the global voluntary carbon markets to the negative impacts, US potentially removing itself from climate commitments? Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's actually one that I've been getting for the last year, even though we didn't know the results of the presidential election or the trajectory that it would take. I would say that probably it has a pretty minimal effect, just because there hasn't to date been significant government support of carbon markets within the US. So it's really been developed from the ground up. And I think that in terms of, I mean, one point that I want to make is that we don't see it as voluntary carbon markets, plural. We see it as a single voluntary carbon market that sort of stitches together all of the sources of credits, all of the various compliance markets, many of which have begun to accept credits that are generated under voluntary schemes for ETS and for carbon taxes. So I would say that's probably the trend in the last year that we see as being the most relevant. And then the other thing is with the coming operationalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. We could see, especially with Article 6.2, which allows for bilateral exchange of carbon credits between individual countries, we could see more involvement there. So yeah, I would have to say that in terms of the political ramifications, it's hard to say, but I don't see it having a big impact, just because the approach from the US has been more from the bottom up, more from corporate and project developers.
Great, thank you, Alex. And I think that leads on nicely to the question that Clement has put in the chat. Shall we expect a linkage between the UK Woodland Carbon Code, peatland code, and the UK emissions trading scheme?
So I guess the brief answer is yes, potentially. So government consulted on whether or not certainly woodland carbon code credits might be included and allowed to go into the emissions trading scheme at the moment. And the government is kind of analysing the results of that consultation. And I think that in the new year there will be some further outcome from that consultation that explains what might happen when. So I guess at this stage it's yes, maybe, but let's see the outcome of that consultation.
Yeah, can I just add to that? In their consultation, they kind of dismissed peatland code credits from there because it's emission reductions and not removals. So I know quite a lot of other organizations have put a consultation feedback to that, stating that it should be at least considered the same way as woodlands, because of the argument I just made to the atmosphere. There is no difference if you plant a tree or if you restore a peatland. A peatland credit is not the same as an avoidance credit. It's an active emission reduction credit. It's very different, but not as such recognized in the market. So that's been our response, but I have not seen anything since. So we'll wait and see what the government comes back with.
Thanks both. Henrietta, we've got a question for you from Chris. As a responsible investor, do you take into account whether the companies you invest in have adopted the Task Force for Nature Disclosures reporting mechanism, or is that not yet a priority for you?
Yeah, so it is a priority for us to look at the investments we're making and the impact on nature from those investments. We don't currently use TNFD for that. We are looking at TNFD for ourselves and how that might apply to the companies that we've invested in. So in theory, it is part of our approach to be looking at nature impacts across our investments, but it's not specifically TNFD yet. But I hope it will be in the future. I think that's likely the way that it's going to be going.
Thank you. And we've got another question for you, Henrietta, from Ellen. Do you only look at removals? What is your view on peatland restoration reduction activities?
Yeah, so as part of our net zero strategy, we are only looking at removals, and that is largely because that's what the Science Based Targets Initiative requires us to look at, albeit that is still undefined, and to some extent I know SBTi is still working on fully defining what they mean by neutralisation of residual emissions. So we're not 100% clear where that's going to go, but that's kind of the assumption that we're working off at the moment. We do obviously think that peatland restoration is a really important thing to do, and we're very supportive of that. And indeed, a lot of the projects that we're supporting have elements of peatland restoration as well as elements of woodland creation, because that's just the nature of the habitats that are there. And so we're kind of supporting that work, but we're not looking to monetize it through a credit from that, because we are only looking at removals credits because of that being the current definition of net zero that we've got to work to.
Thank you. Moving on, I think we've touched on biodiversity benefits already, Lucy. So, but do let us know if there's anything specifically more you'd like to know on that. We'll move on to Tom's question. When looking to purchase units, is it possible to search for projects by location? For example, as a business in the Southwest, would I be able to find projects in the Southwest to buy units from?
So on the Woodland Carbon Code website, we have the facility by map to see which project's in your area, and you can click on the map and then find out a little bit more about that project. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute just so you can see that.
Yeah, on the peatland side, we are actively working on that at the moment. So hopefully by the start of the new year, we have a similar easy to navigate map on our website.
Perfect, thank you. Question from Sam. Realistically, with so many PIUs already purchased, are we ever likely to see a significant volume of woodland carbon units? Are you expecting projects to withhold credits until verified as WCUs, PCUs, aware they are higher value, so understand there's a financial benefit to doing so if they can?
Hi there. So there was a lot of questions in that one. I guess that graph shows you all the projects that are validated at the moment. And obviously there's more projects being added to that every week. So as well as the 700 odd projects that are validated, there's about 1,400 projects that are awaiting validation for us, and more is being added all the time. So whilst, so there's altogether, I think there's about 30 million tons of CO2 registered and already validated. So there's like another 20 million tons of CO2 to be kind of added to that graph as the new projects get validated, and then more are coming. So I think the volumes are going to increase. Whether projects withhold credits until they're verified, I think there is a mix, and the market's changing. So initially, a lot of projects were selling all their units as PIUs, and I think some buyers are being perhaps more cautious, or choosing to wait and sell units as verified units. So I think there will be more of a choice over time, and there will be a higher proportion of them available as WCUs as we kind of move through time. Are they aware of the higher value? Yeah, so, and I think, some of that thinking is, well, maybe the value will be higher as a WCU, and obviously the certainty is higher as a WCU. So yeah, I think that is the way it's going. I guess one other thing we could mention in terms of that uncertainty and kind of understanding the difference between PIUs and WCUs is there's another Ferns project, there was a number, which is looking at a standardized contract between buyers and sellers, and it kind of sets out all the risks and liabilities and who might take those and what happens when things go wrong. So we've set out a template contract for buying PIUs, a template contract for buying WCUs, and they're going to, if you're interested in knowing more about that, there's information on our website, which I'll put in the chat. And if you're interested in looking at those sample contracts and commenting on them, then we'd be interested in hearing from you as well. But hopefully that'll help in the market in terms of providing some certainty and helping people understand the risks and liabilities.
And Vicky, if I could just provide some context from our work in the global VCM.
Sure.
This is pretty common of an issue for project developers to encounter across standards, especially with nature-based projects, because the timeline for the actual reduction or removal of carbon from the atmosphere can take decades, but the project activities that need to be financed could only take a couple of years at the beginning of the project. And so there's a blend of strategies, whether that's other sources of capital that don't solely involve selling credits, selling PIUs, or additionally, we see often projects where they're creating forward contracts for the verified units that will be delivered. And so it's a different way of the buyers and the sellers to decide where they want the horizon for the risk to be. And so, I think that's something that's really important for project developers to think of when they're beginning to initiate the project, is how much of this will be sold forward. Is there a big difference to us in terms of what we think the price for a PIU and a WCU is? Ideally, as we get more data as well on the price of transactions of WCUs, they'll be able to make a stronger case for one or the other.
Great, thank you. Henrietta, a question for you. Are Aviva interested in projects to use credits against their own claims, net zero or broader contribution claims, or are the investments to support project development with the purpose of holding and selling credits to buyers in the future?
Yeah, so the projects that I sort of mentioned on my slides, at this stage, it's actually philanthropic money that we're using essentially. As an organisation, we put 2% of our profits every year into kind of community funding, and it's that funding that we've used to support these projects. So they're not pure investments for kind of a commercial return. We hope that they will generate carbon credits, because that's kind of the point in terms of proving that these projects can be investable in the future. And where they do generate carbon removal credits, we'll be retiring them against our own claims. We won't be looking to hold them or sell them or transact with them in any way for the purposes of these particular projects. Obviously, in the future, we hope more of these projects are investable, and actually we have a kind of separate arm of the business, Aviva Investors. They're the organisation who are investing, for example, people's pension money and so on that's invested with us. They'll be investing, and they are looking at, setting up kind of investment funds where they are investing for commercial return and investing in carbon removal credits and using those credits as a way to generate a return in the future. That's kind of the model where we want to get to. So we want to get to the point where we are making commercial investments, and we do then want to take value from those credits. But the work that we're doing at the moment and those projects that I mentioned are actually all around kind of helping the market to develop, helping those projects to become more investable. And so any credits from them are just retired for us and our net zero ambitions, rather than to be traded in the market.
Great, thank you. Question from Sam. Are there any discussions about stacking the value of carbon with other financial instruments out there, such as biodiversity net gain credits and nitrate migration credits?
Yeah, I can answer that. So yes, we are looking at stacking, both on the Wood and Carbon Code and Peatland Code in general. And we've set out, I think, in both standards about what needs to happen in the market for that to be an option. So, for example, there needs to be credible standards for those other ecosystem services that we potentially could stack with. Additionality is an issue that we need to start of the project, need to know what's in the stack, what's all going to be sold. But a lot of that is still really uncertain, because there are not really any other voluntary markets yet for these other ecosystem services. So it's quite high risk. So in our current voluntary biodiversity crediting program, we are, like the proposal and what we'll consult on is a bundled credit. So carbon and biodiversity uplift bundled together, but quantified biodiversity uplift in there. Specifically on biodiversity net gain is a compulsory credit. So there is a legal obligation to deliver that credit, and therefore it will not pass our legal additionality test, not for the Peatland Code and not for the Wood and Carbon Code. So you'll not be able to stack a voluntary carbon credit with a compulsory biodiversity net gain credit. And that's, I believe, the same for the neutrality credits. It's also compulsory, so you cannot combine those two. So potentially in the future, with voluntary other credits, if the market is developed enough for that, but currently sticking with bundled, and it will never be able to stack with a compulsory credit because of the legal additionality.
Great, thank you. I think we have two final questions, and we're due to finish at 3 o'clock. So yeah, we'll just carry on with them. What about the Department and Treasury support for the voluntary carbon market that came out earlier this year? Seems like with new admin, that support may dissipate. Bit of a question on the political situation there.
I think certainly some of the decisions are bound up in this decision about the emissions trading scheme. So there was some of the changes in the rules to tax that were going to help nature markets, and DEFRA are still working with BSI on the nature markets framework. And also within the Scottish Government recently released their nature market framework. I've lost track of who's calling things framework and principles, but both Scottish Government and UK Government have recently come out with kind of new nature market principles, kind of supporting the idea of the Woodland Carbon Code, Peatland Code, and other nature markets to help meet biodiversity and climate targets. So I think some of those have come out since the government changed, and I think the commitment's still there. So let's see what happens with the ETS as well. But yeah, I think the commitment's still there through those kind of nature market principles and frameworks from both in Scotland and UK. And I think Wales also recently put out some nature market principles. So certainly across, you know, that the whole of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, I believe there's certainly some meetings planned discussing at the moment as well. So yeah, I think the support's still there. I don't know if you have any other views, Rennie.
I think this question might have also been about the US Department of Treasury and the statement that they made. But I don't want to overstate the degree to which that statement from the Treasury was really concrete and had specific agenda items and plans. It was really more of just like a general policy statement. And like I said, I would expect in the US for support for carbon markets to come from fragmented sources. So you could still see state governments that support it. For example, California with their ETS, and Washington State has also established an ETS recently. So yeah, I don't want to overstate the degree to which the federal government was involved at any given point.
Great, thank you. And one last question, hopefully just a quick response on this one if we can. Just building on the emissions trading scheme question, if woodland carbon units are included, do you see this as a massive benefit to woodland planting rates and attractive to project developers, or do you think the effect will be more subtle?
I guess potentially yes. I guess the devil's always in the detail. The price of units in the ETS is much higher at the moment. So if there's a bigger price driver, then that would obviously make things more attractive. I guess the devil's in exactly how it's going to work. But yeah, potentially there's a big driver there to have a better price for carbon credits and to kind of make the market work faster and encourage more project developers to get involved.
Brilliant, thanks Vicky. So I think that's all the questions for now, and we're just about at 3 o'clock. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and thank you to all of our speakers for taking part today. Before we finish, I'd just like to highlight our next webinar, which will take place on the 23rd of January. That's about some of the key developments which the Woodland Carbon Code team are taking forward at the moment, including work around remote sensing technologies and also the standard buyer-seller contracts that Vicky mentioned. You can see details about that on our website or in our newsletter, which you can subscribe to on our website. So all that's left for me to do is to thank you very much again for attending, thank our speakers, and just to say I hope you found today as interesting and helpful as I did. Thanks everyone. Bye now.